afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. One of the most important decisions a business owner makes is hiring employees. A business owner needs to know the law about overtime, employee classification, and workers' comp, as well as issues like taxes, health care, and internships. When it comes to agriculture, for farm business owners, the law on these issues and others can be complex. So today we're going to get a handle on some of the issues that farm business owners need to pay attention to in order to hire good employees and follow the law. To find out more, I'm joined by Mary Peabody. Mary is a community economic development specialist with the University of Vermont Extension. She's been researching farm labor issues and has some key information to share with farm business owners with us today. So, Mary, great to see you.
Thank you.
What led you to start looking at farm labor as a research project?
So, well, a couple of things. One is that, as you know, there's a huge interest in local foods and in growing farms in Vermont. And one of the real pinch points for farms in scaling up and getting bigger is labor. And so it is a massive issue for farms, not just in Vermont, but across the Northeast and actually across the country, as we've learned.
And so how did you go about collecting information for this project?
So, well, we start with a standard lit review, which is basically looking at what other people have looked at, seeing what other people have, what is out there to begin with. From there, we went to focus groups where we asked experts to come in and talk to us about where they saw gaps and where they saw problems. Then we went to the most interesting part so far, which was actually doing interviews with about over 50 farmers across 4 different states. Asking them, sort of what's worked, what hasn't worked, where are their problems, and then consolidating all of that data. And now we're working on a survey which has just been released, which we'll send out to masses of farmers to get more information.
So what have you learned so far about farmers and labor?
So, well, interestingly enough, things break out into 4 different theme areas. We have, no surprise, I'm sure, the legal issues, which we're going to talk a little bit about. We have finding and retaining employees, which is, out of all of the people, and it's not easy always to find employees in a state like Vermont where unemployment is relatively low. So, basically, how do you find them? And once you get a good employee, how do you keep them? And then the third problem is communication issues, and how does information flow from, if I'm the farmer, I hold a lot of information in my head, how does that flow down through and out to the employees so that things get done in a way that I'm happy with and satisfied with at the end of the day? And then the last one is the most interesting from my perspective, which is the farmer readiness, which is really sort of the psychological shift from, most people get into farming because they love growing things, they love being around the animals, they like walking the fence lines. Well, when you start hiring employees, you start spending a lot more time at your computer, and while other people are doing the things that you really love to do.
Big change.
Big change.
So are the issues different for all types of farms?
Well, what we've learned is that we've been looking mostly at vegetable and diversified farms, but we have learned that there is a big difference between small farms, which have just 1 or 2 employees, where communication isn't such a problem, because if you and I are washing carrots and packing carrots, we're standing there for an hour or 2, and I can tell you a lot about my vision and a lot about what my expectations are. When you have a lot of employees, that kind of communication gets a little trickier. It also varies between livestock farms, which tend to have fewer employees but more year-round.
Right.
Both part-time and full-time, versus vegetable farms, which hire a big load of employees to work for the harvest season, and then, so they're there part-time or full-time, but for a short period of time.
Mm-hmm. And so you wear a few different hats with UVM Extension. You are the founding program director for the Women's Ag Network and the UVM Extension New Farmer Project, and you're also an Extension Community Economic Development Specialist. How does your economic development hat fit the labor issues that you've been researching?
So anytime you have an industry sector that is struggling to grow and is facing some problems, that becomes by definition an economic development issue. Mm-hmm. And so in Vermont, where agriculture is so critical to our economic foundation, labor becomes a huge economic development issue.
And so what have you heard just anecdotally from some of the farmers that you talk to as far as the issues that they're facing?
Well, we heard a lot about the need to get policies and procedures down on paper so that you're consistent over time and across employees. We learned that it can be very tricky when you have family members working on a farm alongside paid employees, and that, the need to be honest and say, sometimes my son or my daughter needs to leave at 3 o'clock for soccer practice, and as a family, that's something that we're going to support. We learned a lot that because a lot of the times the employees will live in the village or in the city, they have to commute out. So transportation is sometimes an issue, and sometimes you will have clusters of employees that need to commute together. And so if you can't just ask one employee to stay an extra hour to finish up a project if you've got
Right.
3 or 4 in a cluster.
Interesting. So how have these research findings translated into helping farmers with their decisions about labor?
Right. So the research is fun and good, but when the rubber hits the road, it's time to get tools out there for farmers. And so what we're working on is getting a labor dashboard online, which has some tools that farmers can go ahead and take a look at. One of the things that we have up and running right now is a job description generator, which walks farmers through the process of writing job descriptions, because we've learned that that's one of the key pieces, is that every position on the farm should have a job description attached to it, so that both the farmer knows what to expect and the employee knows what they're going to be evaluated on.
Right. So if you're hired on to do one job, then all of a sudden you're needed in the milking parlor, you need to know that could happen.
Exactly.
So what are some of the most important factors that a farmer should be thinking about when it comes to hiring help for the upcoming season?
Well, first of all, start early. It's already not early, so hopefully people already have their job descriptions ready, and they're thinking ahead to the season and where are they going to need help and what periods and how many, and part-time, full-time. And they're thinking about what kinds of employees they might want to have on the farm. Do you want interns on your farm? Do you want a part-time seasonal crew? Do you want H2A, which would take a long lead time to prepare for, but works well for many farms?
What's that?
So H2A is a federal program that brings foreign workers in for temporary seasonal positions. So on Vermont farms, we see a lot of Jamaicans coming up to work apple season and apple harvest. They also come to work a lot of the larger vegetable farms.
And so what about minimum wage?
Yeah, so minimum wage can be a barrier for some farmers. We did hear a lot of stress and anxiety from farmers about, the fact that they want to pay their employees a livable wage, and at the same time, they just don't really have the profit margin to feel like they are able to do that. So the thing about minimum wage is that although you may or may not be required, and again, this is, it gets into the legal stuff, which is very complex. But the prevailing issue in Vermont is that regardless of what the minimum wage is, you're competing with other entry-level jobs in the area. So you're competing with fast food restaurants, you're competing with grocery stores and big box stores. So you're going to pretty much have to pay the minimum wage at the very least to get people in.
And so what should we be looking for in the future?
So we're going to continue to flesh out that dashboard that we talked about a few minutes ago. We're going to continue to put out some publications. We've got some legal guides that we've just launched. As I said, we have a survey in the works, which we're going to be pushing out and encouraging farmers to help give us some more feedback. In the spring, we'll be doing a series of webinars to get at those communication issues that we talked about earlier. Sort of, how do you head off problems before they start? And what happens if you have to let an employee go? Because again, we've heard often from farmers that conflict is not their thing. They, when things start to go badly, they feel a little flummoxed about what to do.
Are most farms looking to hire more than 1 or 2 people?
It varies. A lot of times when they're very first getting into employing, they're looking at 1 or 2 employees just to sort of get their feet wet and learn to manage. Very often, bigger as they scale up, they find that they really need a field crew. So they're going to need, 5, 6, 8, 10 people working in clusters to get the kinds of things done that they want to do.
And they'll have to train them too, usually.
Yeah, big issue. Training, and that's one of the stress points for farmers, is that obviously, you can hire a really good worker, but you don't have a full-time job for them, so at the end of the season, they go away. It's kind of up in the air whether that person will be able to come back or not. If they don't, then you're back at ground zero, having to do all that training and orientation over again.
So where do farmers find qualified on-farm employees?
Well, the best source that we heard from farmers themselves was word of mouth from other good employees. So if you have good employees, you start telling them early, that you're going to have positions next season. Do they have friends? Do they have family members who are looking for work? If so, get their contact information. Another thing you can do is, go to the organizations that you're a part of. So, if you're part of the Grass Farmers Association, if you're part of, any other farmer networks, and start networking with other farmers, because that's where employees tend to wander around in groups. So.
And so do you find that it would work out for farms to share employees? Has that ever happened?
It's a struggle because quite often, just like sharing equipment, when you need somebody, everybody in that region needs them too. So, I think in some cases it can be. I think if the more flexible that you can be in terms of hours of the day that they're going to work and days of the week that they're going to work, it makes it easier for an employee to potentially package a couple of positions.
Mm-hmm. And we've got some publications here that you're very familiar with that are
Yes,
available
yeah,
online.
yeah.
And so one's called Classifying Workers in Vermont. Are they employees, interns, volunteers, independent contractors?
Yeah.
That's a big issue.
Big issue, huge issue. And so we contracted with an attorney to take a look at both federal law and Vermont law and to give our farmers the most up-to-date, accurate information we could, because it's a huge issue in terms of what is what. And you don't want to run afoul of labor law.
Is it based on percentage of hours worked? Is it the job that people are doing?
No, actually, it has to do with expectations, and most generally, an intern comes in with an expectation that in exchange for a wage plus their labor, they're going to actually learn something. So very often, the case is that interns come to you because they're intending to be a farmer themselves at some point, and they're wanting to learn from you. So in order to have an intern, you really have to have a mindset of an educator first. Mm-hmm. And an employer second.
All right, here's another one. It's called Managing Risks of Interns and Volunteers in Vermont. Mm-hmm. And so that's a whole nother ball of wax.
That's another whole ball of wax. And what surprised me most when we started talking with our attorney and getting ready to write this is that she said, it doesn't matter whether you're actually paying somebody, whether they're a volunteer or whether they're a paid employee. In the eyes of the law, anybody on your farm helping you with the mission of your business is considered an employee in terms of liability.
So you have to have insurance.
So you need to be covered. You need to be up. You can't just assume that because somebody's coming on your farm and volunteering that you don't really have any liability or obligation to them.
Interesting. Have you ever come across a situation where that's happened, or?
There have been cases, and not in Vermont, but there is case law that is pending that. And that's how all laws sort of evolve, is that somebody pushes the limits, files a suit, and then the courts will decide.
Mm-hmm. And there's also something here called a checklist summary. And it sort of summarizes a list of steps addressed in the guides, and it says, check each one as you've completed it. Mm-hmm. And some of them are, plan to offer less than minimum wage, verify your eligibility. And then if you do not plan to provide overtime, verify your eligibility. And if follow the laws of payment, notice requirements, and working conditions, secure a workers' comp policy, verify eligibility to work in the United States. Is that a big issue that farmers will find, sort of a pool of people that say, hey, we're looking for work, and then you have to document them?
Mm-hmm. You absolutely are required to double check their documentation and make sure that you can't verify whether what you're seeing is authentic, because that's a little bit beyond the expectation generally that employers have, but you are required to actually see documentation.
And so set up to withhold federal and state income taxes, that's a whole other thing you have to do?
Yeah, you become very much of a record keeper. I mean, the good news is that the tax department is well set up, and you can go in there, you can create an account, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. But if you don't know that you have to do that, and sometimes employers get caught short, it can be quite a shock when you find out that you're several months behind in paying.
Wow. And then arrange to pay the farm's contribution to the employee's federal and Social Security and Medicare account.
Yes. Yeah, and this is why we're developing one of the cost calculators for estimating what it really costs to have an employee. Because if you're paying somebody $12 an hour, well, it costs you $12 an hour, but there's other costs that are attached to that, including your time training and orienting. So it's really more than that $12 an hour, which farmers need to understand.
Wow, well, we're just about out of time. How can farmers get more information or the resources that we've been talking about?
Right. So we've set up a really simple email address, and people can email aglabor@uvm.edu, and we'll be happy to send links to all of our publications and to the dashboard, and we'll invite folks to take the survey if they're interested, or they can just give me a call at my office.
That's the easiest.
Yeah.
All right, Mary, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.